Cameron, we enjoy to watch movies on the side, but, both of us are a little bit nerdy and we have a favorite pastime of playing video games. And this has spiked because we are in the lucky minority for acquiring some PS5s. Cameron, just to start on a different topic for the show, before we get into the film that we've been watching, this is not a gaming podcast, but we have an affinity for doing it. What have you been playing lately?
Yeah, well, I've been playing Spider-Man. I'm trying to complete it. So I'm close. I'm getting close to the platinum. So hopefully that'll be over and done with. I could put that in the bag, and then I'm probably not going to jump into Miles Morales right away because I want to give it a little time. I think I'm going to be Spider-Man'd out, So I'm going to go to Ghost of Tsushima next.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I'm playing Miles Morales. It's excellent. Cameron, you're in the in-depth for film, right? But it's funny because when it comes to gaming, you have to play the mainstream titles. Do you think that there's sort of this similar disparity between hardcore gamers that play the indie titles versus the guys that only play Call of Duty releases every year? There's that broad spectrum. The casual would be the Call of Duty player versus the guy that's I know every indie developer and whatnot. Where would you put yourself on the spectrum for that?
Well, I mean, I do play Call of Duty, but I think for me, the stereotype of that is the guy who gets 2K every year and the Call of, the new Call of Duty every year. And that's the only thing on his shelf. But I mean, for me, I play most of Sony's first party releases. I play odd stuff. I mean, I'm not super into indie games typically, but I will. I mean, I have a PlayStation Vita, so I feel like I'm pretty hardcore in that.
Yeah. Both Cameron and I are Vita lovers. There's some great indie classics. I love Spelunky. I was just raving the other day about Ollie Ollie 2. Have you played that?
Yeah, I have. It's really good.
I love that. It's
really
game.
Fun.
Yeah, it's so stylistic, such a cool rhythm take on almost a skating game.
Yeah.
It's super neat. Yeah, I would put myself probably in more of the hardcore because of the exploration, but I really feel Sony's first party is sort of the Criterion collection. That's their standing is they're we are game true video games, even though they're all third person action adventure games, it seems, but they have but
they're all quality. I mean, usually they're such quality, and they're kind of the most deep that you get for legitimate storytelling in video games. It's usually a Sony first party game.
Yeah, how do you think that competes with the medium of storytelling in film, right? Is that because
I don't think it's as good or on the level yet. Not saying that it can't get there, but for me, what I always come back to is there's so much. Well, I don't know. I feel like there's every time you play a video game, you're well, I wouldn't want to watch this on as a film. This would be a terrible and boring movie.
Yeah.
But the positive aspects of video game storytelling are things like choice and things the interactivity between what you're doing. So I don't feel like it's I don't think we've gotten to a place where it's knocked it out of the park. We're consistently getting, games that are pushing the boundaries of storytelling. I just don't think we're there yet. But video games are so new, they're a young medium. So, if you looked at films from 1920, they're not going to be the same sort of depth or level as something like The Godfather, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting that you pointed out the concept of choice, right? Because it seems like the effective video game storytelling only hones in on the choice aspect. And it almost makes it feel like film in a regard. You look at the more recent release of Detroit Become Human and what they're trying to do with that, where it's all of a choice-based storyline, kind of choose your own adventure thing and sort of the emotional impact that can have. But then I also consider sort of this deep open-endedness of like a game like Shadows of the Colossus, where there's like this heavy loneliness and it's trying to tell you something. There's like this like unspoken word that is coming up when you're experiencing the game because you're interacting with it and things like that. I think the medium has an opportunity to almost trick a player in a full immersive experience because of their engagement throughout the entire product, right? I just think because a player's engaged and has self-motives, like you could just get really lost. For example, like, you know, both Cameron and I have played Red Dead Redemption 2, and I think the writing and the storytelling in that game is like novel level. Like it is like so good, but at the same time, you know, and I chose not to basically do any of the side quests because I was so in it for the story. You can like turn left and shoot a deer in the head and then like rope up some people and throw them on train. Like you can completely derail the tone of the story because of player like agency, right?
That's true. That's something weird about like Red Dead, where, you know, he's like the sympathetic character, Arthur is, and, you know, you're kind of playing as someone who's like, you know, maybe the heroic bad guy, or, you know, like the anti-hero, and then you could just go off and just like murder everybody in a town, and like there's no story consequence. It's nothing, you know, there's nothing. All you walk in, you pay your fine, and then you're good to go.
Yeah, I think it's pretty difficult to manage a player's like crazy intention with the story at the same time. That's like its biggest flaw. Like a game like Breath of the Wild gives full urgency and ability to a player's interaction with the world, but there's really not a deep story at all. Like the focus is the play, right? And because when you start taking away the play for the story, then it's like the gamer becomes disengaged, right? It's this interesting phenomenon. It will be curious to know how interaction begins to blend with story in a way that also lets players feel free to express themselves through play. That is a side topic.
In any case, hello and welcome to Cinema Spectator, a show where an expert and a casual movie fan talk about video games for like 10 minutes.
You can't
watch
get
films.
I just want to say, you can't get that kind of deep opener anywhere else. All right,
it's true.
It's a completely side topic, but that we could have done a whole episode just on that. We're not even going into that. We're just having fun with it.
I'm sure we could have. Maybe that'll be like a bonus episode at some point, because it's a good topic, like storytelling in video games. I think it'd be fun. Well, today we watched a classic, often considered the greatest movie of all time, The Godfather, directed by Francis Ford Coppola and starring Marlon Brando and Al Pacino. And I don't know. I don't feel like this movie really needs that much introduction. It's The Godfather. It's, you know, it's, like I said, considered one of the greatest movies of all time. Now, I just want to interject a little bit of my personal opinion here before we get into sort of the big stuff with this movie. I really like this movie. I like it a lot. I don't think it's the greatest movie of all time. So, you know, that just, I would say for anybody who's new, who hasn't seen it, go into that with like tampered expectations, I guess. Like if you go in being like, this is the greatest movie ever, and then like you watch it, I think you might be not disappointed, but just like a little you might be curious as to like what's going on. So for me, that's kind of my advice to anybody who's starting to watch this movie. Isaac, should we go into what do you want to hear first? Because I can give you a little background on Coppola. I can give you sort of where this movie is placed in sort of film history. What are you interested in hearing about? Give you some agency.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course. I think what I'd like to do is sort of discuss a first-time viewing, and then I want to hear some background, because I went into this movie pretty blind besides knowing the name. If you're a first-time listener to the show, or you listen all the time, we usually show at the beginning, so here it is. You can support us at patreon.com/ECFS Productions, throw a couple dollars away, get commentary track, questions read on air, all that good stuff. Check it out. You know where the Patreon's at, patreon.com/ECFS Productions. Ratings help. Tell them friends. we got to get into this movie because it's long. There's a lot to dive in, so we're not going to dilly-dally on it. This movie's difficult because who doesn't know about this film, right? Like, who hasn't heard it? I was extremely excited to sort of see like what all the hype was about. Now, Giuliano's dad is Italian. This movie is like, the holy grail to him, right? We told him that we were watching it, and Giuliano's my girlfriend, and he was like just so excited. He's like, this is an extremely important film to me and stuff, and he's been trying to get us to watch it all the time because he knows I like movies, and so I think there was like a little bit of that, kind of joy and exposure, the way that they're authentically like speaking Italian. There's all that fun stuff, and Jules and I are like laughing about
the side quest in Italy.
Yes, all that good stuff. I was like, this is like your family history, Juliana. You gotta enjoy it. But I think a lot of my own expectation really left the film coming across underwhelming, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we spent a lot of time on Scorsese. My affinity for sort of these like gangster films comes from an appreciation of what like Scorsese laid out, the engagement, the excitement. I mean, like The Irishman to me is like the most mature and profound way that you can tackle like a gangster film and really have a statement of like morality that like is like put in front of you and like just driven home and sticks with you. It's like, it's so powerful, So to move from like that level of excellence, right, in gangster films, and to have a like kind of a preconceived notion where I'm like, wow, this is the potential, right? Like that's how good they can be. And then this one is rated like the best of all time, it was really flat. Like it just came across like super drawn out. Like all of the acting performances were really like hit or miss for me. And I know that's going to sound like just wrong to a lot of people. I just found it so sterile. That's really the best way I can put it. I think Sonny is a little bit exciting. He's got some character, but was it like Al Pacino's character is just like very
Michael.
Michael is so stern. I almost had like a zero emotion throughout the whole time, except for these small moments, which it's like the film is like trying to say, oh, he's emotional because you never see him emotional. Like pay attention to that. But I'm like, I just don't care about Michael. I don't know why I should care. I don't like, that was the biggest struggle. So like, I feel like I don't have any sort of reason to root for these people besides the fact that they're Italian and we're a family and huzzah, here we are. I'm just like, okay, like I didn't get any of the heart. And I think maybe it's because a lot of it was just performed with this subtle realism, right? Like there's like a little bit of that touch, but for a movie that is going for that like subtle realism, there's a lot of absurd moments of drama and explosion and death. And it's just kind of like, okay, like I just found myself like kind of chuckling at different violent moments where I'm like, all right, like whatever. It was just getting weird, I think the most effective, and I guess spoiler, but effective dramatic moment that was like violence is like Sonny's death, right? Which I think is very well done. But like other scenes where, Michael's Sicilian wife explodes and stuff, I was just like, what? like I was like, what is even happening? Like it took me like 5 minutes to even figure out he was in Italy. I don't know how I missed it, but I was like, this doesn't look like, New York. I'm like, what is going on? And I was like, oh, that's right. Okay.
It sounds like you weren't paying attention.
No,
that's the real problem.
I was. It was long though. I was like, what? I knew he had to go somewhere, but I thought he was like hiding somewhere in the States. And then they're like, oh, he's in Sicily. I'm like, all right, whatever.
No, I said take a little vacation to who knows where.
Exactly. Yeah, like I just didn't realize where he was.
Well, they're speaking Italian.
Yeah. All right. Needless to say, I think the film might have been better if my expectations weren't, blown out of proportion. So I appreciate you like saying that at the beginning, right? But I was just confused. Like the biggest takeaway that I had coming into the conversation around this movie was, I feel like this is a movie that you don't need to see before you die. And everyone told me I got to see it before I die, like that's such a weird thing. But I'm like, there's so many other films that are going to mean so much more than this one. I don't know what it means. Like, what is the ending? Like, it just ends. I'm like, what? Like,
Isaac.
What is happening? Like, I'm just.
Oh my goodness.
So
yeah, I think you missed the entire movie. I don't know what was going on. Here's the thing for me. So obviously I disagree about everything that you just said, but my so this is the third time I've seen this movie. It's very long, so I don't watch it very often, but I watched it with Brad, who has never seen it before. And I think for me, the takeaway that I got through this movie was through this rewatch. It's a movie that you have to really pay attention to, really understand all of the characters, where their sort of, where their mindsets are at. And it doesn't hold your hand at all. And I think that's sort of a, honestly, I think that for someone who is maybe a more casual viewer or someone who's not used to watching those kinds of movies, that's totally going to throw you off in my mind. And that's why I knew going into this conversation, I was like, yeah, I don't think Isaac is going to like this movie, because it's one that you have to do a lot of work in, when you read a book, and you're like, you're passively reading versus like actively reading. And so you don't really get the same depth or grasp, with everything that's going on. And then, you walk away and you're like, oh yeah, that was fine. And then you talk to someone who's like read the book and like deeply like, followed along and like been like analyzed and like been in love with the characters and whatever else. You talk to them and they're like, oh, but this is like so important. Like this little thing that you might have missed is like so important because it connects here, here, and here. And that was the thing that I noticed watching it this time was, if you're even for a second, even for like one scene, if you're kind of not paying attention, or if you're missing things, or you're not doing the active watching, you're gonna miss it. It's just gonna fly by, because everything is so interconnected, everything is so meaningful and impactful in the rest of the movie, that like you said, it's a realism. There's a realism to it, and there's a subtlety to everything that goes on. And in my mind, this is a movie that obviously an audience in 1972 walked in and didn't expect to be given like a novel experience. They weren't expecting a movie that was as dense and as deep as as the book, or as dense and as deep as sort of these characters go. And I think that's kind of what took people away, and arrested their imagination, because I think it's a movie that demands a certain level of I don't know. It demands a certain level of you really have to pay attention. It demands your attention, I guess. So
I can see what you're saying. It's not like I missed anything from like what was happening, Like I don't feel like I did, like I missed a lot. I
Okay,
just
so
felt
why?
like
We're gonna have a quiz on air.
Sure. All right, let's do it. Fine.
So the final scene, spoilers, I guess, but it's The Godfather. You should watch it. The final scene, right, where Kay is asking Michael a question. What is she asking?
She's asking if he killed his sister's husband, who was married to his sister at the beginning of the movie.
Yes. Okay. And so when the door closes and she looks back, what does that like say to you? Or like what is, I know you said like it just ends, but it doesn't. With the framing and the characters that that you've sat with through the whole movie, there's something important going on in that subtle small exchange.
Yes, I mean I understand what they were saying, right? Like he lies to her, and he has like that very dramatic moment where he finally shows emotion and says, "Don't ask me about my business," right? Which is a large shift. Like it's good writing, right? Because him at the beginning of the film is very different than him at the end. There's an actual change, right?
Yeah.
Now he's surrounded by this underworld, and the ending is like symbolic, right? He's shutting the door, he's shutting her out, and he's lying to her, and it's his business. So
and the whole family, everything dark in a family is kind of like closing in on his life,
right?
And it is the parallel to the first scene. We get the wedding scene, and he's the one who's kind of explaining things, and he says like, that's my family, Kay. That's not me, and so he goes through and he says, and this is the change that you're seeing through Michael. You're seeing him be, an honest and a respectable man, and then getting involved in this lifestyle that is, not as good for him, and not as good for his relationship.
Yeah.
Well, in any case, but I mean that's the analysis of the final scene. But yeah, I mean the reason why I said I don't think if you go into this movie, you're going to be blown away if you think it's like, if your expectation is like this is the greatest movie ever. I think it's because people don't expect movies like this anymore. People don't really have a tolerance for these kinds of movies, I would say. Part of the enjoyment of this movie is that dissection, is that sort of active watching, active, listening and understanding. And in my mind, I think people want like a little bit of that. They want like maybe like a sprinkle of that in the end, or they want like a something that they can chew on a little bit, but they don't want the whole movie to be active watching, I guess. If that makes sense. And so for me, I mean, when I first watched it, I was underwhelmed personally. I was like, oh, this is the greatest movie of all time. I don't know, like it's good, but it's not like my favorite thing ever. And then watching it again, I was like, no, there's like a lot here. It's really dense and really, there's a lot to chew on. And then watching it this time, I was like, wow, like everything is so packed. It's like every scene is packed full of things, that you just miss if you're not paying attention. In my mind, this is a movie that has to be rewatched, and has to kind of be chewed on, I guess.
Yeah, I think that in my mind is like why it didn't succeed like for me. Do you know what I mean? I hear what you're saying, but there's like a fundamental flaw for me where it's like I'm not bought in till like way too late. Like I think a good example is Don. There's something about him from pretty early on, as the head of the household and everything, that you understand him, you kind of like him. His performance is like strange to me because he's constantly looks like he's like holding in a fart, and he's also like he talks really weird. Like I don't understand like what they're trying to do. And you're following him and you're like, I don't know why I'm following him besides his relation to the title of the film, right? He's the head of the household. I didn't feel anything for him until he was picking out fruit, right? And he gets gunned up and you're like, well, okay, that's that, right? And then he's basically down and out for a while. There's a good scene with him like crying when Michael shows up at the hospital. But really, like, to me, I wasn't convinced, I guess, by his character till he dies for real, like in the field with the kid. And I'm just kind of like, we spent so much time with him, and now you expect me to care at the moment that you succeed in making him a good character, like 2 hours into the movie. Like, it's like they wanted you to like him and then go back and appreciate what was set up before. I'm like, that's not the order that it's supposed to be done in, you know?
I don't think so. I think the opening scenes, what you're trying to grapple with him is the balance between him being sort of a respectable person, and then also him being sort of this monster as well.
Yeah, but that understanding of him it's complex, but it isn't like, it didn't resonate with me fast enough to understand like what I was interpreting. So I understand what you're saying. Like you're saying like you need to watch this movie again. My problem is that you're already in love with his character, right? Because you've watched it 3 times, Like you already have an understanding of who he is. Like for me, it's like the first viewing, I'm like, I don't care about him. I'm not convinced by anyone in this movie. And we sit here and you're like, okay, well, you have to dissect it. You have to tear it apart. You need to watch it again. And I'm like, but it should have done it for me, right? It should have put it together for me, Other movies.
See, that's what I mean. You need to have your hand held.
No, but this is my problem. You cannot excuse this, and say I'm just not good enough of a movie watcher. This is what our podcast is about, right? This is what drives me crazy about watching these like high-end cinema movies, right? Because at the end of the day, these great films that are rated so highly are turned around to a gun to a casual viewer, and you're just told that you're not a good enough movie watcher. But I sat through, The Irishman, which people said is boring and exhausting. I'm like, no, that movie lined it up for me. That movie lined it up and it knocked it out of the park, right? This movie does not do that. And so I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I just have to dissect it more. I'm going to sit here and say the movie is lazy in a regard to a casual viewer. And you can laugh all you want, but like, I don't think people need to watch this movie, right? I don't think that this movie is consumable to anyone besides the people that are like committed to chewing on it, It's frustrating for me, Cameron, because I tried, and now I tried to sit here and experience it. And now I know that the cinephiles are going to turn on me and say, you're wrong. And I'm like, this is the problem, right? 97, 96 on Rotten Tomatoes, right? And I still don't get it. You're going to say I need to sit there and watch it like 100 times to really chew on the characters. I'm like, shouldn't the characters just be good from the start? Can't I just be convinced from the beginning? Can I be like warmed into it? I don't feel like I should give this movie more, like it's frustrating.
Yeah. Well, but that's kind of what I mean is like, I think there's, I think there is a disconnect in a lot of ways, not just in terms of, and it's not just you being, you're like, it's not that you're not a cinephile or like a movie lover or something. I think there's like a couple things that are going wrong in terms of your viewing experience, that would put you off from these characters. I would say the first thing is, it's a movie from a different era about a different era, right? So you're already like a few times removed from sort of what's going on, and so like obviously there's a for me, like I don't need to be like, how do I say this? Like, are you looking for like likable characters in the movie, or like how are you trying to connect with what's the experience of you trying to like connect with the characters? Like, because it seems like that's the problem. It's it's a character based movie, where you're not connecting with the characters, right?
Yeah, I think my disconnect with these characters is that they seem sterile, and I think a lot of it comes back to like a realism, but I wasn't brought in any sort of way. It was just like we're people talking on screen, right? And it reminded me of old movies. But now that my perception of old films is broken, like we had Wilder Month, and I realized that these old films can have characters that like shine like super well with their writing and whatnot, And so now I'm watching this movie that's newer than Wilder films, right? With sterile characters that I don't know why I'm supposed to be bought in, besides the fact that they have context that's being exposed to you within the first 30 minutes of, Michael, he's a good guy, and he's not involved with the family, but he has all this there's so much history and lore that they're trying to like, wrap you into, and I'm still confused why I should care. Do you know what I mean? Like, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, right? Which is a big like commercial blockbuster. There is so much lore in Lord of the Rings, right? There's all this stupid stuff that you can learn about that is not like integral to the story, even though they spend a lot of time explaining it. The first 10 minutes of that movie is background, right?
Yeah.
But from the earliest introduction of the hobbits, there's something relatable about them. You're like drawn into who they are. And I can see people saying that this movie does that. They're at a wedding, it's a family, but I just wanted to feel part of the family more, like I wanted to have that buy-in, and I never got it because they're so busy already trying to juggle the complexity of Don's character, where he's jumping between business and family. And I still don't, I'm like, what? Like, and now there's all these Italian people singing, and I'm like, this is another culture, like good for them, I guess, like I'm not relating to any of this.
That's the other thing that I was going to say was, you already have the movie that's, from a different era, about a different era. So, 2 times removed. And then it's about a different culture from you. 2 different cultures, actually. It's about Italians, and it's about the mafia, which is completely like, it's the, I think for a lot of people, the intrigue, the behind closed doors, that sort of, I guess that like, you want to see behind the curtain, you want to see what's going on the other side, right? That's part of the intrigue that buys you in. But I know for you, you're not like a fan of gangster movies, typically, and so you don't really care about that. Like, that hook is what what's supposed to get you in.
Well, that's not. I mean, that's not necessarily true, because I liked a lot of the Scorsese ones.
But when we watched those, you were like, yeah, I don't really care about gangsters. Like it's not. I mean, like the hook, for you is not the gangster part of those movies, right?
Yeah. Yes, and I don't know. No, it's not the hook, but like you look at.
But for a lot of people, it's like, oh, you hear about these sort of behind closed doors figures, people who are also, you know, the 70s, like this is an era that was still full of gangsters, like legitimately. And so there was a lot of people who were who wanted to know without getting involved, but who wanted to be like, oh, this, like, what's going on this, on the other side of this curtain? What's beyond the veil? And for me, that's why Michael's character is so important in the movie, is because you see him go from, you know, he's honorable, he's a veteran. You know, he's at this wedding, he's explaining the sort of the terrible brutality of you know, things that his family does, and you know, he always calls it the business and whatever. And you're seeing sort of you're seeing a glimpse of like what's behind the curtain of, you know, Hollywood, of entertainment, of the casinos, of like you're seeing just like a little glimpse of it. And then as the movie progresses, he's obviously your sort of he's the audience character in a lot of ways. And so, you know, you're seeing as this is going on, you're seeing him become more and more wrapped up in the darkness of his life, of his family's life. But I can understand why, if you're someone who's like, yeah, I just don't really care about gangsters, then like there is automatically another barrier to you getting into these characters, I guess.
I don't know. Like, I don't think that I don't care. It's that maybe it's that Michael isn't a character that works as a surrogate for me subjectively, I guess. Cause I'm thinking about like,
yeah,
Goodfellas and the main character in that movie, what's his name?
Hank Hill.
Yeah. The way that he's like, he's an outsider.
Henry.
Yeah. Henry is brought from the outside in, and there's this exposure to family and culture that is effective. And again, like you're saying, like it's a different movie in a different generation too, right? Like, I think that's insightful, but something about the way that movie handles bringing you into and exposing you to that setting, like maybe it's just more modern, but it's really effective. It makes this movie seem like, I just felt like it was like standing off. Like I felt like I was watching it through like binoculars is the best way I could put it. I was like, what's going on over there? You know? And I'm already trying my best to like, you know, interpret it and take it all in. And it just feels so removed, like it's pushing me away the whole time, like an arm's length. Like, you're not going to understand this. You're not going to follow what's going on. I'm like, no, I get it. Like, I get what's going on. Why are you not letting me feel it? You know what I mean? Like, why can I not feel it? Right.
Right. But that's what I mean. The feeling is because you're, it's about like machismo men in machismo culture in the 40s. You know what I mean? Like you're not going to feel it necessarily. You're going to have to, that's where I'm coming from, is like that. I totally understand what you just said. Like, it's like looking through binoculars. That's how I was the first time. I was like, yeah, well, it's like, it's okay, but like, why is it so far from me? You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I totally understand that. Yeah, which is why, I mean, I wouldn't, obviously, you know, it's a 3-hour long movie, so it's kind of a tough thing to be like, oh, you should watch this multiple times. But I think it does need multiple rewatches to really grasp. I think it's something that, for, like you said, like, you know, I enjoyed this movie because I already cared about the Don Corleone. And I guess that's sort of true, but like my first time, I didn't really care about any of the characters.
That's my problem, though. Like, that's what I'm saying.
But then when I went back in, then I did care.
That's fair. Like, that's not excusable, though. Like, how is that? This is what frustrates me. Like, how is that okay? Like, people are like, oh no, like it's totally fine. Like, I want to watch another 3-hour movie again. You know, I'm like, do you guys like? What the heck? Like I just
So it might be interesting to think back on this discussion after we watch part 2, because for me, I haven't seen part 2 since high school, but I watched part 1, and I kind of had that feeling. I was like, there's a lot that's here, but I'm not really like all that invested. And then I watched part 2, and I was like completely blown away by like how invested I was, and how much I enjoyed part 2 a lot better than part 1. But I haven't seen it since. And I've watched part 1 multiple times since. So my opinion on that might completely change. I'm not sure.
See, that's interesting because my brother watched part 1 and loved it on his first viewing, which I haven't talked to him about it yet, but he was like, "Oh yeah, like that's really good." And I shared a couple of my thoughts with him. I was like, "I don't know, like it's not really I don't really get it yet." He's like, "Oh, but the aesthetic is like on point. Like it's so cool." And I was like, "I guess." And I was like, "Well, what'd you think of part 2?" And he was just like, "Oh, I didn't like it. I didn't think it was good at all." And I'm like, "What?" So maybe this film is kind of like the season 1 syndrome, right?
Yeah,
Where
maybe.
It's spending so much time like exposing you to the characters. I'm curious, Cameron, were they planning multiple parts in this trilogy? Because it's a trilogy, right?
Yeah.
Were they planning multiple parts from the beginning? Is that part of sort of like?
I don't think so. That was one of the things I was going to talk about actually with the sort of position of this movie. They obviously bought the rights to Mario Puzo's Godfather, the book, and I think it was just this sort of condensed sequence. I think it's different from the book. Puzo obviously worked on the script and was involved in the production, and then I think they actually made like he wrote a script for part 2 with Coppola. So I think it's they weren't necessarily they weren't planning a sequel necessarily. Also, they didn't think that this movie was going to be good. They actually hated Coppola, Paramount Studios. They did not. He was basically on the verge of getting fired all the time, is what he said.
Wow.
So, which is really interesting. But he's like, he was like, yeah, I had like during the filming of this, I was like in an apartment. I had 2 kids and another one on the way, and like, I thought that they were going to fire me all the time. Like they hated the script, they hated the cast, they hated the. Well, they didn't hate the script, but they hated the cast. They hated the way that it was being shot because, notoriously, Gordon Willis, he's now called, I think, the Prince of Darkness. But this was a very dark movie, and it was underlit on purpose, for a lot of sequences, and the studio really did not like, the footage that was coming back. And they had to convince them that like, no, this is on purpose. Like we're not, we're not just dumb or bad at our jobs. This is intentional choice. And then, actually when they first presented the cut of the movie, the first cut was only, I think, like 2 hours and 5 minutes. And the producer came back and was like, no, it needs to be longer. Which is crazy. Like that's never something that a producer says.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think they didn't think that this movie was going to be as successful as it was. And when it came out, it obviously blew up. Won Best Picture, and I think it won 9 Academy Awards or something.
Wow.
Which is a lot. But yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I think it's like I don't know why I'm just thinking about like Game of Thrones or something. Like the first season might be more after you've watched like the third season. You know, like the amount of
Mm-hmm.
setup and impact that season has.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I'll give you a little insight in what the second movie is. The second movie is parallel stories. One takes place after the events of part one, so it's with Michael as he's kind of establishing himself as a Don, sort of his road towards success, and then the other follows a young Vito Corleone, which is Don Corleone, as he's coming up from Italy, as he's sort of establishing himself in America. So there's two parallel stories that are going on that play off each other, but are separate. So,
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I wish I was more excited to watch the second part, but I'm gonna go in like with my best foot forward, I think. I don't know, Cameron, like do you think, obviously like you have a great affinity for this film. Like we've been talking about what I'm missing, but like how do you suggest the audience embraces this film? Because I'm for like people enjoying it. You know, I don't want people to have the same experience I had, you know,
yeah,
9 Academy Awards, you know, like, come on. I'm not going to, I'm not going to say that I am like 100% correct. I'm just trying to share my opinion as clearly as I can. Right. Like,
yeah.
How do you approach it? You know?
I would say for me, go into this movie. Don't like the worst thing that you could do to go into this movie is to watch like Goodfellas before, or watch like a Scorsese movie. As we've sort of discussed, because Scorsese took sort of the impulse and the leanings of this movie and made them sort of fresh and new, and gave them sort of energy and life. And usually, you know, what Scorsese is, he's usually portraying someone who's not the top. Right, he's not portraying the sort of top brass of the mafia. He's always portraying someone who's like a grunt, or you know, sort of lower on the totem pole, who ends up getting involved in these things. And this movie is about the top brass. You know, it's about the Godfather. It's about the person who's in charge, who's calling the shots. I would say my recommendation for going into this movie is put yourself in the mindset of reading a long book, or you know, sort of trying to dive into a new world, or understand a new world. Put on your critical thinking hat and your active viewing hat. That's my suggestion, because otherwise, I think you're just gonna like we've said, you're gonna be viewing it through binoculars. But you know, one of the things that I think people enjoy about this movie is how, for basically everybody that I've talked to, everybody that I have heard from about this movie, except for you, has said that it's been able to take them from a place that is so distant from their own reality, and draw them into to the world, and to the inner circle of this culture. And that's what happens for me when I watch this movie. And obviously Isaac didn't get the same reading from it. But I would say open yourself up to be sort of I guess to be transported to somewhere new, to be transported to a place that you have no relation to. Open yourself up to that. So
yeah, I agree with Cameron. I'd say like try to avoid the tunnel vision. I would even go as far as to say like maybe try to find a way to expose yourself to the characters before you even start watching, which I know is probably, I don't know, like not popular, but if there's some way to be like, oh, like this is kind of some context about where this movie's going. Even as far as like, I know that this could be sacrilegious. I'm sure Tim Smith will appreciate this, but like, to even like read spoilers so you can like really chew on it, you know? Sometimes I enjoy watching movies like that.
Yeah. What I was going to say is my girlfriend read the book before she watched this movie.
I bet you that's probably cool, huh?
And she got a really, she really appreciated that experience of, you know, diving in with, you know, the book and then seeing, you know, these things happen on screen or seeing the interpretation on screen, I guess. I think she really enjoyed the movie because of that. So, and I would say I didn't expect her to like it either. So, I thought she was going to be like, yeah, it's fine, but you know, the book is better or something. But she really enjoyed it, even compared to the book. So, yeah.
I think I want to make it clear. Like, I don't think this movie is bad. I think a lot of it had to do with my anticipation for what it could be.
Yeah.
You know? It's harsh for me to say, like, you don't need to watch this movie at all. But I think a lot of it comes from a place of, like, the filmmakers putting the work on the viewer instead of doing the work themselves. And I don't hate some of that. You know, like I kind of enjoy when a movie does let you dig your teeth into it. But I am more akin to maybe the blockbuster style of Lord of the Rings that lets you dig your teeth into it, still falling back like on a book and stuff, than I am to this, where I felt like at arm's length. Again, probably a lot of it has to do with subjective viewing and all that, but I didn't feel like I missed a lot of the themes. Like I didn't feel like, I mean, from like my reading of the ending, like it was sudden, but I just didn't, I was like, I get what you're saying. I just don't really like, okay. Like I still don't really care, you know? And that's a problem for me. You know, that's a problem for me. If the end, it just, so it will be interesting to see how part 2 goes.
I'm going to say in 2 years, if we're still making this podcast, we're going to rewatch it.
Yeah. And I think this is one of those movies that deserve, because we definitely want to do a month of rewatches of some of the movies that I didn't like. I'm trying to think of other ones that you were like, Isaac, you need to watch this movie again and see what you think. Can you think of any? Oh, man, I have to look at the episode list real fast.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I can't think of it. There's definitely more than a month's worth of rewatches, though.
I know. I'm such an offensive hot take. I mean, like Breathless was our first one, and you said that. I mean, you picked a pretty intense first episode.
Yeah, it's a bad movie. I don't want to rewatch it.
I think I was kind of hard on Citizen Kane. I think that was one that you were like, you should give that one another chance.
I feel like, you know what, that's actually a similar movie to this in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, I would agree.
Where, you know, I could totally see how someone could be like, yeah, I don't know, I didn't really like it. It didn't feel like I didn't get into the characters, or I didn't understand like what was going on, or you know, even as far as like, yeah, it was just boring. You know, like I can totally see how someone could say that on their first watch, or even just be like disinterested because it's, you know, it's an old movie or whatever. Like I could see how that could be the case with this movie as well. And I would say actually me and Juzo have talked a lot about Citizen Kane. You know, when we first got to film school, we were roommates, obviously. So, we talked about all the classics that we've seen and whatever else, and we were sort of running through the movies. That's where we both realized that we all hate we all hate. Why do I Godard? I always forget his name. I don't know why. I want to say Foucault, but that's the that's the
still a foreign
French
language to me. So
postmodernist. In any case, so but we we were like, yeah, Citizen Kane's just okay. Like, it's not the greatest thing ever. And I remember distinctly saying, yeah, I like Goodfellas way better than The Godfather. Which probably is still true. I still like Goodfellas way better than The Godfather. Or at least it's a movie that I would go back and watch more.
Yeah.
Personally. But then we were talking a little bit about Citizen Kane and The Godfather recently, and we were like, there's like a lot in those movies. It really, like, he said something that I thought was really interesting, where he was like, yeah, it was like my fourth rewatch of Citizen Kane, where I had not just like, viewing from an intellectual perspective or viewing from sort of the analytical perspective of being like, yes, I enjoy this scene. That scene was very well written. He said, like, that's when I first became invested in the movie, and became emotionally involved with the characters, and got to a level where I felt I could actually not just understand it, but like intellectually, but enjoy it on an emotional level. And I thought that was like such a perfect way to put it, because there are totally those movies that are like that, and I think The Godfather is one that I had that experience just rewatching it, where it was less that I understood it intellectually, or was sort of diving deep intellectually, but I had the experience of now I actually like get this and appreciate this on an emotional level. So I think don't put that on the fault of sort of the filmmaker or whatever, because there are people who walked away from Citizen Kane immediately who are like, I'm invested. You know what I mean? Like, there are definitely those people. And it's possible that because of our, whatever it is, because of our subjective experience, our tastes, our likes, dislikes, we sometimes, with movies that are considered so great, we don't get it right away. And I think that's true in a lot of cases, and I've had that experience myself. So
yeah, there's so many variables around viewership, right? So it's kind of,
but don't say it's lazy for Coppola. Just say you didn't understand.
Yeah, I don't know.
You didn't understand, not intellectually, but you didn't get that connection emotionally. Which, like I said, that happens. That's perfectly reasonable to say, but in my mind, that's when I say, okay, if I understand it emotionally, if I like it, or if I understand it intellectually and I like it sort of scene to scene, and I feel like I should like it, but I don't get it emotionally, or I'm not getting there, that's usually when I say, well, I should probably rewatch it.
I think this is like a pretty clear variation between like you being an expert and an enthusiast about it and me being a casual, because that sort of response is not natural to me. And it takes like a true, like almost like a forgiving heart towards the creation to really even give it that much of a chance. Right. I can see myself, like, I can push myself to get there. I could do it. But like that is so much work for something that I'm like, why didn't it just succeed at the start? I've seen plenty of movies that are able to succeed in this. I think that's kind of like the other like notch in my criticism for it. And what shocks me is I've seen other movies older than this movie succeed in it too, right? Now it's like, instead of becoming a apologetic cinephile, now I'm even harsher on movies that don't seem to like have their stuff together, you know, because I've seen the best, right? Maybe that's a difference in like opinion, you know, like I have no doubt, Cameron, that I could sit down and watch this movie 3 or 4 times and eventually just fall in love with it. Right. But I almost, unless it's like Cars 2, like I almost feel like you could pull that to some degree, like, you know,
I don't think so. I don't
movies
think so.
that are considered good, right? With movies that are considered good, like you can really just brute force your way into loving it. And
I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true because I tried to do that with Tenet. That's exactly what I tried to do.
Yeah, but that movie's not good.
But a lot of people think that movie's good. A lot of people who are way more casual than me are like, "Oh yeah, that was awesome."
No,
I'm like, what? What?
I'm talking about like okay, you were talking about behind the curtain, like the behind the curtain critics, like the true like cinephile. Like I'm not saying, I don't think there are cinephiles out there that say Tenet is the second coming of Jesus, and if they are, they're going to take back their word in 3 years. Okay.
Juzo loves it. He thinks it's great.
Yeah, but Juzo and I love The Dark Knight Rises, right? Like for us,
no,
like
true.
for us,
That's true.
like it comes from a love of absurdity instead of a love of craftsmanship, right?
Yeah.
I think for like the echelon of like craftsman movies, right? Anything in the criteria, like let's say IMDb top 100, right? If you have this experience where you're either emotionally connected but intelligently disconnected, or intelligently connected and emotionally disconnected from the film, if you're a real cinephile, you'll sit there and get it. You know, you will sit there and push yourself to get it, right? Even for the movies that like you absolutely hate, you'll at least get to that moment. And for me, it's like I'll never be that. I will never sit there and force myself to get it. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm like, this movie, this movie better come out, you know? So
I know what you mean. I think it probably is a difference between the two of us, but for me, what that tells me, if there's a movie that's like highly regarded as one of the greatest things of all time, and you get it intellectually, but you're not there emotionally, that's when I am like, okay, well, what's wrong with me? Like, what am I doing to not appreciate this movie enough? And I think part of it is that's sort of the case sometimes. Sometimes you're like,
yes.
Oh, I'm not there because I'm not letting myself get there, or I'm not there because my preconceived notions are getting in the way, or I didn't expect this movie when I watched it the first time, it didn't give me the same experience that I thought it was going to, and that's a lot of times what it is it's like there's a moment, there's a part of you that is like holding on to like your like your like dissident opinions, like sometimes I'm just like, well, I don't want to like this movie because I want to be different from all the people who like this movie or something. You know what I mean? Like some that's a true feeling that some of us have, where it's like, yeah, but I've been saying all the time, like, Citizen Kane's not that great. Breathless sucks. But like sometimes you have to let that go, and you have to let it wash over you. Let the rush, let the experience just go over you and say, I'm in. I'm in.
Yeah, I think some time maybe to disconnect from my initial response, to come back and like chew on it
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm gonna have a positive like experience in another viewing. I just like the reason I'm so I'm stating it so strongly is because I'm giving my initial impression, right?
Yeah.
I'm giving it to the audience. I honestly hope that this conversation for the people who haven't seen this film like helps them go into it and only see like the greatness of the movie. Someone had to suffer for it, you know, like someone, like I hope that you can go in and take it in with a new context and appreciate the details and watch it without binoculars and have it. Like that's what I wish I had. And maybe that's the cynical result, right? Where I'm like, man, like why didn't I have it? But
and that's sort of the point of the show in a lot of ways too, is that I'm not giving you any context to these movies. I'm not giving you sort of the background of the history or anything like that. I mean, we talk about it all the time, but like sometimes we watch a movie and you're like, man, I really wish I had like looked this up or like known or like, you know what I mean? Like, I really wish that I was, that I could be on the same level because like, I don't really understand this at this point. You know, so I get that. I totally get that. Maybe this podcast is helpful for people who want to be, who want to like this movie, who want to understand this movie.
Yeah, and even like furthermore, like hopefully it's entertaining a little bit too, right? To go in blind. I mean, I think it's hilarious, you know. Like I play dumb for it, so it's like, you know. I don't know. It is a little bit of an experiment. When we were trying to name the podcast, right? Like Cameron and I wanted to name it like something around like a lab or something, like almost like a lab rat being exposed to these things. Yeah. So, hopefully, you know, it's for your enjoyment as the audience.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I totally knew where this conversation was going to go just by watching it yesterday. I was like, yeah, I don't think Isaac is really going to like this. And I think part of that is because we spend so much time on Scorsese. I actually really think it.
No,
like
I agree.
Scorsese is a filmmaker that took on the mantle of The Godfather, took on the experience and the sort of cultural love in the movie, and then he was like, nope, I'm going to do something better and more enjoyable and more entertaining, and I'm going to make a movie that is going to blow people away, not a movie that people are going to come back to and sort of chew on like a nice chewy steak, or you know, like it's. His movies are not. Maybe The Irishman is the only one that gets to that level, and I would say The Irishman is a true masterpiece in my mind, and it's one that that I think. I mean, I don't want to say this forthrightly, but I think might sort of transcend past the level of anything that this movie gets to, that The Godfather gets to. And I would say my opinion on Goodfellas is always that I would way rather watch Goodfellas than watch The Godfather. But I also don't know if it's not as dense. It's not as deep. It doesn't really mean as much as The Godfather, I don't think.
Yeah.
And I assume that what that is just like there's a sacrifice in terms of entertainment value, right? The Goodfellas is just so entertaining that like you have to sacrifice a little bit of that meaning or that, you know, that depth.
It brings us, like it honestly brings us back to the conversation we were having at the beginning of the podcast about video games, right? Where story and player control and agency, right? Or choice, right? That's a balance that has to be fought with, right? I lean on the side where it's like Super Mario Bros. Is forever fun and there's no story, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas like an entertaining film like Goodfellas is, you know, it's forever fun, right? But it might not have that depth. And it's impressive and impactful when a creator can balance the desire of an audience member between those two things, right? In movies, it's like just raw entertainment, and then on this other end of the spectrum is like, I guess almost like revelation and depth on something that's like beyond what the movie could ever talk about, right? Yeah, that's the balance that they're fighting. The same that we were talking about with games.
But the thing is Scorsese, is always known for the sort of the bombastic and the entertaining, and bringing things in a very stylistic and fun way. But his last two movies have been reaching for those, for that like expansion of his emotional value. Like Silence, I think, is a movie that is basically not entertaining at all, and is in fact very difficult to watch, but is one that reaches the heights of meaning, reaches the tippy top of something meaningful. And The Irishman is not very entertaining either, not as entertaining as something like Goodfellas. But again, it knocks it out of the park when it comes to something that's impactful, something that's meaningful.
Yeah.
Something that devastates you in the end, really.
Totally. I think there's no better way to wrap up our conversation than that. When it comes full circle, Cameron, you're like, wow, that's probably a pretty good episode. You know what I mean?
Yeah, or like when the movie comes full circle, in the end, that's probably a pretty good movie.
So, my opinion is mostly offensive and probably misinformed to those who love this movie. So, I think our conversations are best in disagreement. I'm not even lying about my initial viewing, though. We'll see, Cameron. I'm excited to do that rewatch month when it eventually happens, because it will. So
yeah, we'll take some time to do that, but yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we haven't even hit the year mark of this podcast yet.
Yeah, I know. We still have so much to go through. We post every Monday. Yeah, you can. I don't know. You don't subscribe on. Do you subscribe? I guess you could subscribe to podcasts. Download them. Yeah. Again, patreon.com/ECFS Productions to get your questions read on air. Tim, I don't want to read any more of your long question. Please send us questions, you patrons, into the DM. Just DM us on Patreon, and we will read them on the show, usually at the opening or the ending at this time. Again, we post every Monday. We appreciate all you guys. Share this episode with friends and family if you enjoy it, and we'll see you next week. Cinema Spectator is an ECFS Productions podcast, executive produced by Darren O'Neill. If you want your name read in the credits of the show, you can check us out at patreon.com/ECFS Productions to achieve this status. Thank you, Darren, for the support, and for the rest of you, we appreciate your support as well. Have a good one.